March 23rd, 1945. Wessel, Lower Rhine, a wind that smelled like wet iron. Searchlights tested the low clouds, then winked out. A DUKW eased down a muddy ramp, its bow nudging black water, its driver thumping the dash once for luck. From the flood bank came a dry cough of a pencil, tapping a map. Then the rasp of a sergeant's whisper in a radio, a voice steady against the hiss. On one bank stood the U.S. 9th Army, 16th Corps, with the 30th and 79th Infantry Divisions, forming up behind canvas screens and willow trees. Across the river lay Germany's 1st Parachute Army. Scratch battalions, flak crews, and engineers braced behind dikes and brick barns. The Rhine here ran roughly half a kilometer across, and was running cold and fast with spring melt. 10 minutes late meant the first assault waves arrived after the smokescreen thinned. The trucks did not look like war heroes. The DUKW was a 31-foot six-wheel amphibian with a propeller and a bilge pump, a 2.5-ton hauler on land that could make about 6 miles per hour, about 10 kilometers per hour, in water. Its tires could be aired down from the cab to claw mud. A small 25-watt set could carry a clear voice across 6 miles. In training films, the voice said "duck," and the name stuck. On German lips, it sounded like a joke. Jokes don't stop rivers. The river stopped plans, guns, tanks, and timetables. Allied doctrine said, "Seize crossings fast, keep them fed faster." German doctrine said, "Hold the line with fire, then counterpunch with whatever armor could move." The weather favored neither side. Gusts pushed smoke into tatters, then slammed it back into a gray wall. A lieutenant rubbed cold fingers together and counted backward from 60, listening for the first outboard to cough. The stakes were simple and brutal. If the Americans failed to get a bridgehead across in the first hour, German guns would walk shells onto the ramps and turn the near bank into a salvage yard. If they succeeded, the Ruhr, the coal and factories, would be within reach. Logistics, not glamour, set the odds. Radios that cut through static, drivers who could land on a dark shore, and the industrial audacity to flood a river with trucks that swim. The trucks bobbing in the current looked like a moving causeway, a man-made river running over a natural one. German gunners learned fast. A battery chief in a farmhouse cellar tapped ash into a tea tin, shifted range by 100 yards, and shouted up the stairwell. The first rounds landed short, fountains of water and mud slapping the DUKW's canvas bows. An American engineer crouched behind a wheel well, felt the smack of spray on his neck, and checked the hand pump anyway. An old habit in a new war. Then the tempo changed. Assault boats clawed forward with ropes and paddles. Rafts took on jeeps. DUKWs nosed up to timber piers, dropped their tailgates, and swallowed crates of mortar rounds. Ops math turned midnight into throughput. 2 DUKWs making 3 runs each meant 6 loads by dawn, about 12 tons of ammunition that didn't have to wait for a bridge. The radios, voices and static, kept the timing honest. Green flare, load, red flare, go. Both sides had strengths. Both had blind spots. German crews had experience and knew the ground. Americans had radios, standardized spares, and drivers drilled to the minute. A corporal clicked his stopwatch, breathed out, and waved the next amphibian forward. A ripple of wakes slid toward the far shore, like a second current laid over the first. By 3 in the morning, the river felt crowded and strangely quiet between shell bursts. The smell of gasoline and wet canvas mixed with wood smoke and the sweet metallic tang of the Rhine. A gunner tapped his helmet with a knuckle, a little ritual, then leaned into the shield of his ring mount. The invisible advantage, the system behind the scene, was taking shape on the water. The first light would show if it held. The night before, the crossing felt close and wet. Canvas slapped softly in the wind. A maintenance sergeant slid on his back under a DUKW, gloved fingers tracing a seam for weeping rivets, then rapped the hull twice with a wrench. A radio corporal cupped a hand over his headset and tuned until the needle steadied, pencil ticking the margin of a call sign list. American doctrine by March 1945 treated water as road. After Sicily, July 1943, Salerno, September 1943, and Normandy, June 1944, The U.S. Army had learned that the fastest bridge over a river was often a line of boats and amphibians moving on time. The kit followed the lesson. The DUKW, 31 feet long, about 6.5 tons empty, propeller tucked under a steel guard, shared engines and many parts with the standard 2.5-ton truck. A torn fan belt at 2 a.m. could be replaced from a nearby crate. A driver could sit high behind a simple wheel, thumb a cab control to drop tire pressure for mud, and press the bilge switch like a habit. Training built a rhythm into hands and voices. Engineer battalions drilled unloading to 90 seconds. 2 men lifted, 1 counted, and a corporal watched lines and ramp angles, nothing else. FM sets around 25 watts carried clear speech for about 6 miles in flat country. The rule was plain: talk short, say the change, move. A lieutenant tapped his wristwatch, then tapped the map. Green flare meant go, smoke breaking left meant shift to ramp Charlie. Industry made all of that scale. U.S. plants, the same ones that turned out standard trucks by the tens of thousands, also stamped hull plates, cast propeller housings, and packed spares in labeled boxes. A driver unlatched one and found gaskets nested like cups. The pipeline stretched from a warehouse in New Jersey to a muddy lane near Wesel. What mattered was that the label matched the need in the dark. Across the water, German doctrine rested on fire and counterpunch. The Wehrmacht fielded veteran gunners, precise sappers, and officers used to making do. A flak leader kept a box of sight inserts wrapped in oilcloth. A sapper wore his pliers like a watch. But fuel shortages, worn radios, and patchwork units ran against the clock. Field phones were reliable but slow. FM sets existed, but spares were scarce, and training time was often measured in days. Limits showed on both banks. American amphibians could be holed and sink fast if the damage sat below the waterline. A DUKW that wandered sideways in current could stall on a piling and turn a ramp into a knot of horns and shouted names. German guns needed line of sight and good range calls, hard to keep under drifting smoke. An observer on an upper floor waited for a battery chief to confirm deflection, while the window filled with nothing but gray. Specs mattered because they folded into action. The DUKW's water speed, about 5 to 6 miles per hour, about 8 to 10 kilometers per hour, was not impressive alone. In serials, under a smokescreen, with radio timing, it became a moving bridge you could not drop in one hit. Each load held roughly a ton to 2.5, depending on water state. 2 trucks making 3 runs each put 6 loads over before dawn. That could be 12 to 15 tons of mortar rounds and small arms ammo, in time for the first counterattack. A human moment surfaced in the drizzle. An American mechanic, hands black with grease, tore a strip from a handkerchief and tied it around a chafed hose, then wrote, "Replace at 4 a.m." in block letters. A German lieutenant, eyes red from lack of sleep, poured thin coffee into a chipped cup and sketched the river line in his pocket notebook, pencil smudging at the bend. Each man paused, then kept going. Communication shaped behavior. On the U.S. side, voices in static cut needless drama. A corporal said, "Ramp Baker 1 minute," and a driver breathed out, slid the gear lever forward, and bumped down the last timber. On the German side, a Feldwebel hustled a messenger across a street under shell burst. The runner's boots slipping on wet stone. The message got through. It just cost time and nerves every trip. Both sides made bets. Americans bet that standardized parts and drilled timing would beat friction. Germans bet that sharp local fire and quick counters would disjoint a crossing before it thickened. Weather stood neutral but tricky. Wind teased the smoke into openings and then slammed it back across the water. The Rhine itself had its own say, shouldering logs into holes and tugging at ropes with cold weight. Pride-colored judgments then and later. Some Americans called the amphibians ugly. Some Germans mocked the duck trucks in mess rooms. The river did not care. It cared about weight, angle, and minutes. When a driver hit the bilge switch with his palm and felt the pump catch, he knew what mattered. When a gunner sniffed cordite and shifted his sight 1 notch right, he knew too. The systems pointed to an hour where everything would be tested. Radios would be busy or silent. Ramps would be open or cratered. Sappers would cut fuses cleanly or not at all. The decision moment wouldn't look like a speech. It would look like a line of wakes moving on time, or not. 4:30. March 24th, 1945. Weasel ramps slick with dew and fuel. A green flare hissed up, then smeared into the low cloud like a finger across wet paint. A captain rolled a watch chain in his palm, nodded once, and pointed. The first DUKW in the serial nosed off timber, hit a floating branch with a hollow thud, and kept its bow steady. On the far bank, a German flak crew shouldered an ammo crate through a doorway, nails scraping brick. Plan met river in the first 5 minutes. Smoke thinned where a crosswind opened a narrow window, and shells probed the gap. An American coxswain overcorrected, kissed a piling with a crack like a bat, and eased off with a muttered curse. A sapper on the German side tugged a firing lead with cold fingers, checked the crimp with his teeth, and signaled the cellar. The river answered both men without malice. Push here, slip there. The correction loop decided things. On the U.S. net, a calm voice cut the hiss. Baker holds, Charlie live, Serial 2, slide south 2 boat lengths. The column flexed in seconds, hulls angling like a school of fish. On the German side, a forward observer snapped a field phone handset to his ear and waited while the line clicked through a switchboard. A battery chief repeated the deflection back, careful and correct, which cost half a minute the river did not give back. A ponton raft blew a hose. A corporal slapped a clamp on with his palm, then tightened it with a stubby wrench he kept on a cord. A DUKW's bilge alarm chirped. The driver hit the switch by reflex and felt the vibration settle under his boots. Across the water, a German gunner dialed his sight 1 notch right. Lips moving as he walked bursts onto a splash pattern he could just read through holes in the smoke. Contrast stayed simple and sharp. German crews had experience and an eye for current. Americans had radios and a parts bin that fit at 2 a.m. A Panzer IV idled behind a barn, commander tapping a map with a pencil. The engine coughed, starved, and died, the driver pumping the throttle like a prayer. A U.S. engineer squad shuffled ammo boxes down a ramp in 90-second drills. 1 man counting, 1 man lifting, 1 man minding lines. Both sides wanted time. Only one side could buy it in bulk. The specs mattered in the pinch. The DUKW's water speed, about 5 to 6 miles per hour, roughly 8 to 10 kilometers per hour, looked sluggish until you watched a string of them hold spacing under fire. The 25-watt FM set in the cab stayed clear to 6 miles on flat ground. A sergeant said, "Green flare in 30," and 6 trucks eased throttles in unison. A German 20mm clipped canvas and chewed a bow plank. The hull shrugged and kept its nose up. Ugly machines did useful work. The human rhythm never stopped. A runner on the German side skidded on wet cobbles, palms scraping, then shoved a pencil-scratch fire order into a doorway. A U.S. private rubbed cold fingers together, blew once into his gloves, and pushed a crate along the floorboards with his knee. A driver thumped his dash, turned the wheel a quarter turn, and read the current by the way ripples feathered past a drowned fence post. By 6 o'clock, the shape of the turn was visible even in the gray. Elements of the 79th Infantry Division held a shallow horseshoe several kilometers deep. Radios on the bank spoke in clipped checks. Ammo red, wire green, medics moving. German counterattacks formed, hit hard in places, and then frayed when one company had rounds and the next did not. The river, this second, man-made one, kept running over the first, and the gap between plan and reality narrowed until they touched. Comparisons felt crude but told the truth. Where a single treadway could be cratered in one lucky hit, 20 DUKWs were a braided stream. Nick one strand, the rest flowed. Where a field phone tied a gun to a corner, the voices in static tied a ramp to a serial to a platoon, and a platoon to the hour. One side fought brilliantly with what it had. The other side fought adequately with a system that multiplied adequate into enough. By mid-morning, exhaust hung sweet and sour over the far bank. Rates stacked in courtyards. Wire teams unspooled lined through doorways. Medics lifted litters into a truck's open well, the floor wet with river water and coffee. The decision hour had tipped. Late morning, March 24th, 1945. The smoke thinned, the wind cooled, and the far bank took on the practical smells of victory: hot coffee, wet canvas, and oil warming on iron. A supply corporal licked a thumb, turned a damp page on a tally board, and drew a small square for every crate stacked in a churchyard. A medic eased a litter onto a DUKW's floorboards, then tucked a blanket edge under a boot so it wouldn't flap on the ride back. The river behind them still ran cold and heavy. The man-made river ran on top of it, steady as a schedule. Within 48 hours, the crossing that began near Wesel opened into roads fanning east around the Ruhr. The treadways caught up, tank engines found their rhythm, and logistics turned combat power into distance. At Remagen, seized on March 7th, DUKWs had already shown their worth by shuttling loads when the old bridge groaned and later fell. At Rheinberg and across 16th Corps' frontage after March 23rd, they multiplied every hour a steel span wasn't ready. A sergeant flipped his pencil, tapped the map, and said it plain. If it moves across water on time, it counts. Numbers invite arguments, and they should. Tonnage tallies vary by unit and clock. Some logs count ammunition only. Others mix rations, radio batteries, medical chests, and wire. Historians cite ranges because smoke, night, and split ledgers blur totals. Reasonable figures for the first daylight cycle at Wesel run into the low hundreds of tons moved by amphibians and rafts, enough to feed divisional fires and keep advance guards stocked without waiting on a single delicate bridge. The why is as simple as it is unromantic. 2 ramps, tight spacing, short turns, radios cutting out dead time. A calculation becomes a rhythm becomes ground gained. German accounts read the same river from the other bank. Flak crews walked fire onto wakes whenever smoke opened. Infantry made quick local counterattacks where sightlines helped. Sappers mined approaches with skill. What they could not do by late March was be strong everywhere at once. Fuel rations starved movement. Worn radios and overused field phones taxed coordination under pressure. Replacements learned river defense in hours, not months. A Feldwebel scrawled a line in a notebook, "Last ammo box," and underlined it twice. He was not beaten in spirit. He was beaten by minutes and miles. The myths arrived almost as fast as the bridges. One said the DUKW was a toy, good for calm surf and pretty photographs. The facts were dull and stubborn. Water speed about 5 to 6 miles per hour, about 8 to 10 kilometers per hour. Load roughly 1 to 2.5 tons, depending on water and chop. And a hull that, in company, became a braided crossing you could not crater in one hit. Another myth painted the crossing as effortless, a foregone conclusion after Ardennes. The after-action reports cut that down. Crews lost to shell bursts on ramps, hulls holed and sunk in seconds. Drivers who kept the bow up and the bilge running until the river allowed or refused. Logistics wins by inches, not posters. What remains after the smoke clears is the system that made plane machines decisive. Radios, those voices in static, kept short orders moving: hold, go, slide 2 lengths south. Standard parts tied docks in New Jersey to mud lanes on the Rhine. A broken belt at 2:10 a.m. found its twin in a marked crate, and the run stayed on schedule. Training shaved seconds. 90-second offloads repeated until the motion felt like a drill bit. Leadership matched parts to minutes. The result was not spectacular. It was cumulative, which matters more. The legacy ran beyond March 1945. Amphibious logistics became a quiet craft. The habit of treating water as usable road when bridges fail or never existed. Floods in post-war years saw surplus duck trucks ferry neighbors and nurses across brown streets. Engineers in later armies built doctrine around the same truth. If you can move on time over what others treat as a wall, you have room to think. The shape changed. The idea did not. Debates among historians will continue over exact weights and which ramp mattered most, as they should. Weather shifts totals. Duplicate ledgers inflate them. Lost pages shrink them. Honest ranges in a sentence about why are signs of respect, not evasion. Yet, across books and unit diaries, the pattern holds. A river that looked like a stop sign turned into a timetable because a network of ordinary things worked together under fire. Return to the opening image: wet iron, low cloud, cold wind on knuckles, and the thesis is visible without declaration. Logistics, radios, training, and industry are an invisible braid. They do not fight for credit, and they do not need speeches. They ask for minutes, predictable loads, and hands that do small things well. That is how a joke in a mess room becomes a fact at a riverbank. And if you stand on that march bank in your mind and listen past the last burst, you can still hear it. A second river moving over the first, and calm voices cutting through static as a driver taps the dash and points his bow toward the far trees.